Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to our opening panel for this morning, titled Perspectives on Risk and Reward within the Life Science Industry. Again, please do keep your questions coming in for our panel this morning in the chat and Q&A function, which you'll find to the right-hand side of the video box where you're viewing this. And we'll get to as many as we can throughout the panel discussion and indeed at the end. Delighted to hand you over to Wim de Vlieger, who's going to be moderating and guiding us through this morning's discussion. So Wim, over to you.
Thanks, Josh, and thanks for everybody for joining this panel. As Josh was saying, the panel will be on risks and rewards in the life sciences industry, and we believe that we have a very strong panel here for you, which should lead hopefully to a very interesting discussion. So before we jump into the questions, maybe I'll give a quick time to everybody on the panel to introduce themselves, and then we can take it from there. Gil, do you want to start?
Sure. Thanks, Wim. Nice to see everybody again. I was just on a keynote a little while ago. My name's Gil Bar-Nahum. I'm a managing director in the Jefferies healthcare team. I run the biotech business for us internationally. I've been a banker now for about 20 years. Spent half that time in the US, focused again in biotech, capital markets, mergers and acquisitions, and over the last 13 years here in the UK, focused on European biotech. I've helped over 50 companies access the US capital markets from an IPO perspective, and continue to be on the cutting edge of science. So nice to be here today.
Hector, you wanna go next?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Héctor Röthlisberger. I joined here from Takeda Digital Ventures, which is the corporate venture arm of Takeda Pharmaceuticals. I have been with the company for about close to 9 years, and in the venture area for the last close to 4 years. I am the supporting lawyer of a team that is looking into investing in digital health opportunities.
Thanks, Hector. Jason, I'll pass it on to you.
Thanks, Wim. Jason Connor. I'm Chief Strategy Officer at Kiniciti, which is a strategic investment platform sponsored by Walsh Carson, a New York private equity firm, focused on investments in the cell and gene therapy space. We invest in everything in that value chain space except for core therapeutic companies. We launched earlier this year. I joined from Thermo Fisher Scientific, where I most recently served as Group Vice President of Strategy and General Counsel. Came on board to Thermo Fisher as part of their acquisition of Patheon, a global pharmaceutical CDMO. Spent about 10 years there. Prior to that, was in private practice for about 10 years, doing M&A, corporate securities, things like that. And prior to that, started my career in corporate development and strategy at Becton Dickinson, a large life sciences tools company. Look forward to the panel.
Thank you, Jason. Dulce, do you want to introduce yourself? Dulce? Or maybe Marie, I'll pass it on to you first.
Thank you, Wim. So I'm Marie Manley. I'm heading the life science team at Sidley in the UK, and I advise life science companies on the UK and the EU regulatory legal framework. And I promise you it's more sexy than it sounds. I also advise investment companies in assessing the regulatory health of targeted businesses and assist them in being able to qualify and quantify the acquisition.
Thank you, Marie. And we have a fifth panel member with us as well. We have Dulce Gonçalves. I don't know, Dulce, if you can hear us and briefly introduce yourself.
Wim, I think Dulce has dropped off. I'm just going to find out where she is, but please do continue on and I'll get her back.
All right, great. Let me maybe take Dulce. She's been in the pharma industry for 20 years, covering everything from research and development activities to technical operations and manufacturing, regulatory affairs, medical marketing, and then corporate secretariat and IPO preparation and launch. And most recently was the head of legal and deputy general counsel at ADC Therapeutics, which he also helped IPO in the course of last year. So a great panel here with representatives both from the investment banking, investor, company community. And so with that, maybe we can go straight into our first question for this morning. And Gil, maybe I'll ask that question to you. So thanks for the keynote presentation earlier on the current state of the healthcare market and expectations for 2022 and beyond. During this panel, we'd like to discuss risks and rewards in the life sciences industry, as we said. So as MD in the global healthcare investment banking group at Jefferies, and with almost 2 decades of experience, sure you've seen hundreds of transactions in the life sciences space. Based on that experience, you know, what's your take on risks and rewards in the life sciences industry?
Yeah, I think, you know, a lot of it has to do with really corporate strategies and where investors have really been focused in terms of rewards, and the concept of taking your product as an initial strategy, taking your product from preclinical to phase 2A and hoping that you'll have positive data and then you'll be able to sell your company or part of the asset is just not a viable strategy. And it requires a significant amount of capital to take everything down the line. And certainly in certain parts, depending on indications, partnerships matter to maximize value. But the companies that are sold for $7, $8, $9, $10 billion are those that own their own assets. It takes a very, very large number of successful shots on goal for a royalty model to really, you know, be effective and garner a lot of interest from investors. And frankly, if you sell off a lot of the risk for your product at the middle of phase 2, and you get a nice upfront payment, and the rest of the investment's going to come in from that big pharma, maybe you get some milestones and some royalties into the future. But as an overall exit, that's not a synergy opportunity for a big pharma play, and therefore institutional investors continue to focus on assets that are wholly owned and those that have M&A potential. And really you can think about, okay, so when this gets approved, who buys this, right? And where is my overall exit? Is there a 50%, 60%, 70% premium that comes on top of this when the drug gets approved? And I think that's where a lot of investors are focusing. And unfortunately, the drug delivery business model historically, where, you know, you partner up with a number of different folks to try to enhance the overall profile of their drug and lifecycle management strategies. Again, those became very, very difficult business models until those products became on the market and took massive market positions. So if you think about a model where you own the antibody, you own the small molecule, and you bring that forward, you may hit some snags along the road in terms of data, but as you continue to finance it, you'll get the biggest return at the end of the day if you take on that greater amount of risk, where I think sometimes it's very asymmetric. And while you might be able to sell a company, you know, that you own the whole drug for $10 billion, if you parted it out, there may be no buyer at all. It's not a concept of value in some cases. So, and that's where I think the market's really focused, right, in terms of people who own their own assets, as opposed to partnering out as a viable strategy as well.
Thanks, Gil. That's interesting. Jason, you know, you've recently set up, as you said, Kiniciti to help invest and build a cell and gene therapy ecosystem globally. What's your view on the risk and reward trade-off in the life sciences industry?
I think that, you know, right now, in many ways, to piggyback on what Gil said, you know, right now when you think about risk and reward, in many ways there seems to be kind of an alignment of the stars, so to speak, especially in the advanced therapeutics area and the cell and gene therapy area. It's largely driven by the significant increase in scientific advancements and technical innovation and you know, kind of what we're seeing kind of in early stage clinical successes that have driven investment, especially in the early stage therapeutic companies that have really kind of lifted the levels across the sector, so to speak. It's driven and fueled support services, tools, and outsourcing services, as well as kind of that core therapeutic pipeline. Yeah, so right now things seem very very attractive from a development and a selling perspective, and by that I mean the companies and investments are going at a premium, and there's a lot of competition out there right now. So I think that generally, from a risk and reward perspective, it's a very attractive sector. And to kind of piggyback on what Gil said, what we do is we kind of look at it a little bit differently in that we're looking to invest in kind of value chain plays, support services and tools, technologies along the value chain that support therapeutic development and commercialization of advanced therapeutics. And one thing that from a risk and reward perspective that we spend a lot of time working on is early stage technology companies that have very promising technology, but maybe haven't figured out their business models yet. And in many ways, analogous to what Gil described, we see a lot of analogies there on the services side and the tool side, especially in that a lot of companies that have promising technologies have kind of taken this partnering model and look to capture value through royalties and licensing, and we kind of view that as a model that can be improved upon by fleshing out a real kind of services business model. In that, oftentimes, obviously, a lot of risk involved in royalty models, and a lot of uncertainty and a lot of lumpiness, and we try to kind of figure out along the value chain plays that can lead to sustainability across the sector. And lead to more stability with respect to longer term revenue.
That's very interesting. Thank you. Marie, Dulce, or Hector, I don't know if you see similar kind of trends in your business or what you do. But maybe Hector, to go to you, your team at Takeda has been busy, since 2018, building up a track record for Takeda as a corporate venture capital investor. And I understand that you focus in particular on digital health and health tech, a sector that, of course, has seen a huge amount of growth, in particular since the pandemic. But I guess that doesn't take away that growth is often very, very, very difficult, that these companies remain very, very risky asset. Compared to what Gil and Jason said, do you focus on similar things when selecting companies to invest in, or to make sure that the risk profile of your investment portfolio isn't too stretched, or are there other criteria that you were looking at when you make investments?
Thanks, Wim. I do think there are similarities, and that what we do can also be compared to what Jason and Gil are looking at. Takeda has two different investment arms. Maybe to start with, we have an investment arm that actually looks into therapeutic opportunities, which is Takeda Venture Inc. And we have a second investment arm, which I'm part of and a member of, which is Takeda Digital Ventures, which is primarily looking at digital health opportunities. So I do think you need to have dedicated teams that look at the different landscapes. I don't think that the disciplines are that separate from each other and not comparable to a great extent, but I still think it's just a different area. Digital health and technology, in my opinion, is a beast for itself. And as you know, Takeda is a company existing in the pharmaceutical space since a couple of 100 years. So we are in the science space for for a long time, but not necessarily in the CVC space. That is something that we have only built in 2018. And so this is something that we are rather new and yet not that experienced as other venture funds. But maybe just to also to describe how we mitigate risk, how we manage risk. The history that we have from a digital venture perspective is that we started as an incubator. So we created companies in our early in the beginning. And by creating companies, we had this exposure to what the day-to-day business is of a venture, and we would be exposed to the need of speed. We would be exposed to what it means to run a company with limited resources and having just a continuous capital burn, and getting a company actually to a state where the company could start financing and could start fundraising and prepare a pitch deck for investors to join as investors, or get some commercial traction with potential clients of the company. So this is something we have left behind us. We are no longer looking at creating our own companies. It is a quite challenging and difficult environment to be in. We are now focusing on investing, but yeah, what we learned is what we apply now. So we have been able to be at actually at the day-to-day business, and this is something we now use when investing. And we look at the data, we look at what any investee company is able already to provide on data. We look at the commercial traction, and we try to understand as much as possible also the market dynamics that they're exposed to. So maybe this is something we offer just consistently and systematically to any potential investee company. This wealth of knowledge that we have gained. This is one way how we can mitigate risk, or how we see we can mitigate risk, by having a very strong engagement and exchange to understand actually where the company stands and whether they have a viable product that is able to overcome some of the desires that exist in the market. Yeah, I think being a pharmaceutical company or having a pharmaceutical company as a parent company just also gives you that necessity or this interest of being very skeptical, being very observative and careful when selecting potential candidates. We understand the challenges that companies have. We know what it means to fail, but yeah, we try to mitigate through a good and robust process to start with.
Thanks, Hector. And I think during the preparations we had for this panel, you mentioned that as a result, you often look to get board representation rights and information rights, such that you can really advise the company based on the knowledge that you have gathered over the years, and can really be kept informed of what the company is doing. Is that something that you always look for, or is that something that sometimes you're happy with a governance with a without a board right or similar rights?
So being only 4 years in that space, I think it's hard to say what we always do and what is an imperative to the organization. But just coming off a deal that we recently had, where we had a lot of CFIUS considerations to go through. We are not we have affiliates in the US, but we are not we are a foreign investor to the US market. So going through a lot of CFIUS considerations, we noticed we want to have a seat at the table. We don't want to be just in an observer seat. We want to be able to participate, and also to make sure that the money we invest is actually invested and used by the company itself in a mindful manner, and also according to what we have learned from the company as being their mission and target. So yes, I think we have an interest to stay close with companies and support them as they take on.
Okay, interesting. So, maybe to summarize, so Gil, you say, you're looking for assets that really focus on owning, and own the asset. Jason, you said, working and understanding also in the broader ecosystem, and really understanding, the business that you're investing in. And then Hector, you similarly, you indicate that, to make an investment, you want to have a seat at the table so you can share that knowledge that you have gained over time. So maybe to turn it to Dulce, Dulce, contrary to some of the other people on the panel, you've really been on the company side, and you have helped the company really grow from a startup to a scale up to a public company. Is some of the things that Gil, Jason, and Hector are touching upon, are these things that you recognize from your experience?
Completely. Yeah, definitely. I think it's utmost important to reassure investors, to show them that we have the right people on board. Already on the executive team, I would say it's important that you have people understanding the technology and sufficiently senior to be able to put on a strategy together and understand what the overall strategy of the company will be in a few years. Because sometimes when you have a too junior team, you don't have that. You have the excitement, but you don't have that looking forward vision. So it's really important, and I agree with Héctor that indeed having a strong board of directors, including some representatives of the main investors, is also a benefit. Because, for example, at ADC Therapeutics, when you have Peter Core on the board, who was the former senior VP for R&D at Pfizer, of course, you have input from him, which is amazing, because they understand the science, they know where to go, and that's very valuable. So I think indeed having the right people is very important. Having a strategy and then looking forward vision for the company is also important. Of course, your IP will be the key thing, of course, because if you have some IP in a niche area where you can even qualify and obtain the orphan drug designation for your drug, or breakthrough therapy designation, or anything like this, give some comfort for what the potential of your drug can be in the future. I understand the investor's point about owning the IP. At ADC Therapeutics, well, the portfolio is partly licensed in, but it really depends on how you build your licensing in technology, and how you are able to file patents on your own and own IP on your own. And indeed, sometimes you need to reassure investors from that front, but I don't think it's, well, you can always work it through, actually. The thing is, you need the right strategy and vision for your drug anyways.
Thanks, Dulce. And maybe to the point that you made, Gil, I heard people make the same argument, but differentiate between the core assets and some other assets that the company owns, and that indeed, with respect to your core assets, you should be very careful when you engage in royalty or licensing or other types of collaboration agreements. Would you agree with that, or would you still think that any such agreements are very risky and therefore should be very carefully considered?
Well, if you have a single asset, I think it's very difficult to do indication partnering. You can't give somebody non-small cell lung cancer and give somebody else colorectal. right?
I agree.
It's really impossible to do that.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's too complicated. Yeah.
Right. But at the same time, if you have a portfolio of assets, or if you have an engine and you've identified some of the best assets to keep for yourself and have still been able to demonstrate your ability to create value from your engine, whether those are early stage assets that are really just call options and royalties and monetization with some milestones, I think that's a great way to say my technology works. Look at all the big pharma that's put their stamp of approval and given me $150 million up front and wants to get access to my technology, and they're going to pay me royalties in the future. But with respect to what you also own, you have this premier asset, phase 1, phase 2, and talk about really where the overall NPV sits. It's really at that point. I think the validation is really, really key, but it's hard to do with a single asset. I also think that if you're, as you go down that path, you need to have a credible story. So if you think the best asset is in diabetes and you're a small biotech company and you want to try to convince people that you're going to do a full phase 3 study and build a whole GP sales force, that's clearly not credible. But to go down the orphan route or to go down the oncology route and have 80 salespeople eventually and be able to write your own ticket and create that synergy opportunity to be liver focused or kidney focused or really specialty, right? With a brand new drug in that market, I think that is a credible story versus I'm going to, bring this new metabolic pill to the market and target, all 25,000, GI specialists. I think it's just impossible to do that without a partner. And I think those assets, which are more big pharma, like that's where you should partner those guys out and create some value, because that's super expensive. In some cases, some of those cardiology studies require 7,000 patients. I mean, these are enormous studies to maintain 100% of the economics. Whereas, orphan kidney disease, you can easily do that with $75-100 million in a couple of studies.
Understood. Maybe to turn to Marie. Marie, you're the head of life sciences regulatory at our firm in London, Sidley, Austin. And in addition to the litigation work, we also often work together on transactional matters. Where you advise companies and investors on these regulatory items. And of course, understanding kind of the regulatory framework and helping our clients understand that framework is one thing, but really helping them to navigate that framework is quite the other. And I think, maybe a question to you as part of that advisory part of your business. What are some of the ways that you have helped, whether it be investors or companies, come to terms with the risks of that, life sciences regulatory framework that they work in?
Thank you, Wim. I think that risks are inherent to any investment, but in the are variable and depends very much on the technology or the service entity you're targeting. And there is no perfect checklist for all. But what I would say is that there is two main parts for which the regulators add value to a deal. The first one is the assessment of the regulatory health of a company. And what I'm talking about here is analysis as to whether the target is fit for its purpose. So that consists primarily to identify any potential regulatory risk associated with the qualify that as identified skeleton in the closet, who would be really the things to look at. And we've been talking quite a lot about digital health, a pharmaceutical company here developing looking as to whether the company has all the license to operate is a first step. But not all companies are operating perfectly fine if the product's already on the market. However, they may not be. We've seen a case where the acquisition of a target company who was commercialized IVD in vitro diagnostic devices was really putting raising some various issues. They were not upgrading those products to the new requirements. So we realized that a significant number of those products would simply not be able to remain on the market for very long. So this identification was helpful to be able to bring a solution to it. So we were able to see how we could speed up that process and ensure that the investment in this company, if the deal was going forward, was still going to be beneficial. But also we're looking into whether the business is, for example, conducting its activity in compliance with the regulatory framework. And it may seem quite straightforward, but in the context of an acquisition of a manufacturing company in India, it was identified that actually there were some serious issues with the manufacturing. In particularly, there were some serious impurity in the water. And that would be a major findings from an entity such as the FDA or the regulatory bodies in Europe, meaning that the manufacturing license would be withdrawn and therefore the business could not pursue its activity. So that was the identification part. Now, the second step of the regulatory expert is to see, okay, how can we qualify, how serious it is and what can we do? And then putting together, in this instance, we put together an implementation of a remediation plan, and this identification of the issues at stake also trigger a renegotiation of the appropriate purchase price. So that's one of the things we're doing. To come back to the discussion we were having with Dulce and Jill and the others in this call, the protection afforded to the business is crucial because it's the protection of the assets. And obviously, part of this regulatory due diligence is to assess not just but the regulatory protection that in many instances is actually the best protection the product has. And we were talking about orphan drugs, for example. I think Dulce raised as well. For orphan products in Europe, you go for a first stage of designation, but that designation as an orphan drug is revisited at the time when you apply for your marketing authorization. So orphan products are, being a boost of those products, in particularly in oncology in recent years. And when they get to the submission of their application for marketing authorization, where the authority assesses the quality, safety, and efficacy of the product, they look at whether or not the requirement for orphan drugs is still fulfilled. And in many instances now, it's a real battle in Europe for many reasons. There's a special environment at the moment with IP regulatory rights are revisited, and therefore it's extremely difficult to get through that step. Other products may have been authorized in the meantime as well. So the assessment of the risk associated with whether or not to obtain such a protection is essential in order to qualify and quantify the target, the business basically who's going to be acquired. So this is a very important exercise that needs to be undertaken when you're looking at a new business. And obviously, as you know, the second phase, Wim, is really to assess the value, or help to assess the value of the target company on the basis of the issues being identified and see whether the price should be readjusted accordingly, or whether there is a need for warranties and indemnity in the agreement. And that's where this assessment of IP is very important, but not exclusively. And one of the things that you would like to look at is whether there is any reason, for example, for having some particular milestone of payments because of the risky investment and because the acquiring company may want to ensure that actually the development is going in the right direction. And we're seeing quite a lot of those. I would stop here and just engage more in the conversation, Wim, as we go.
Yeah, absolutely. And, something that certainly made some bells ring on my end is the reference to skeletons in the closet, which is something our clients are often asking about. Maybe I don't know if you guys are open to discussing it, but Hector, Jason, Gil, you're all on the investment banking or investor side. Any war stories about skeletons in the closet that you can share during this panel? I'll take it as a no, maybe then.
I think that there are you always expect the unexpected. I know that along the way, especially when I was, with strategic investors, one of our main activities was actually buying, doing carve-outs from pharmaceutical companies, purchasing manufacturing facilities. And you can imagine from top to bottom, I think we've probably dealt with any kind of, whether it's compliance, environmental, any type of skeleton you can think of, you can think of, from, for example, supply chain. Bought a facility in Austria. It was chemical-based pharmaceuticals. They'd sourced some significantly important raw materials from China. When we do the due diligence, we couldn't go to China to do an audit of all the suppliers. But after we bought the company, came to find out that all of the quality documentation and even the actual manufacturing facility in China that was listed as the source provider of these raw materials didn't exist. They were made somewhere else. There was a picture, of some facility that I guess existed for some purpose, but it wasn't making the materials that we had bought, this company purchased. So you can imagine the fire drill there, both with respect to now, having had this, and this was a risk that quite frankly, right, I mean, certainly, there were general provisions, right, in the purchase agreement, about supply chain and compliance and things like that, but really wasn't even contemplated, quite frankly. So you can imagine, having to go back, right, the number of years that they had been, which was 4 or 5 years have been purchasing, having to inform all of the therapeutics companies, of the issue, and having to work through things like that. I mean, I won't get into details with regard to the ramifications with respect to how we dealt with it with the seller. And quite frankly, that wasn't even the biggest headache. The biggest headache was correcting the issue and moving forward. But it's things like that, and stuff happens that no matter how good your agreement is, and no matter how good your team, whether it's of quality of Sidley or someone else, things are going to happen that you never even imagined.
Yeah, I think that's put something in my mind there in terms of contracts and some more stories to think about in that context, and especially since we're sitting in Europe and everybody speaks different languages. Sometimes it's I think you assume that everybody speaks amazing English. I have seen situations where there are 2 different countries, 2 different sets of lawyers, both being drafted in English. And then when it comes time to look at that contract, it's completely ambiguous in terms of what it says around sharing information, having a CDA to do something, and really can create really onerous provisions and situations for companies that are looking to go public in terms of sharing info about said partnership. So I think, I'm sure my Sidley partners here would appreciate, I think the most expensive mistake sometimes people make is hiring inexpensive lawyers. And then at the end of the day, you have a contract that nobody really understands and nobody else can really stand behind. So, as you think about that, think about jurisdictions, think about partnerships, and think about, folks who have English as a first language in some cases, to make sure that the contract reflects exactly what it is that you say, and think into the future about, if I was going to go public, what does this provision do, and how does it impact my ability to disclose information to the market, so that the investors have equal information? I think that's a very important lesson in terms of getting yourself ready.
Yeah, I echo that, Gil. Sorry, Dulce. And if not having English as a first language, definitely hire folks that routinely advise in English and draft in English, because if they don't, as you say, there's all kinds of surprises that may come up. Dulce, sorry, I cut you off there.
No, I was just going to say that I fully agree with Kyle, and it's true that we always negotiate and finalize those agreements on the 11th hour. So you always forget something or do not reread entirely the agreement. You've got the time pressure, and you end up with a contract which is inconsistent or does not address very important points. And to your point about disclosures and being able to share information, in particular when you go for an IPO, that was something which at some point within the company we really had in mind, and make sure that even in a simple CDA, you allow certain disclosures, even to obtain some investment. You need to disclose your partnerships and some stuff to be able to get money or to go for an IPO process without having too much hurdle to go back to the partners, get their approval and all that stuff. So yeah, that's something to keep in mind, indeed.
And I think, Dulce, to pick up on that, I think, while advising in the legal function at ADC at Therapeutics, during the IPO process, that there was an issue, I think, that came up at some point down the road, and then you had to, kind of withdraw the IPO process and start again. In that process, is there something that that you've learned, that you've picked up, and that maybe for the people that are dialed into the conversation, that you could advise them to take into account when they are considering an IPO?
Sure. So maybe before digging into that, I just would like to say that it's not because you withdraw at some point from your IPO application that you will not do a successful IPO at a later stage. So it's really important. And the companies should not be ashamed of having to withdraw at some point and start the process again at a later stage. I think one of the biggest lessons learned, well, there are maybe two of them. The first one is the calendar of your IPO. It's really something very important. You need to plan very well and consider, things as stupid as summer holidays, presidential elections, even, sorry to say that, but even Jewish holidays. You need to consider them, because you may miss to address really important investors if you perform your roadshow during a Jewish holiday and you don't have the right people at the table to discuss with. So that's really something very important to plan and to take into consideration. The other thing also, I think, is when you engage with European bankers as a European company, or on the European continent broadly, but that you go for a US IPO, you need to make sure that your European bank has the right team in the US, and that they really put the focus on you, and that there is a good communication between the two transatlantic teams, and basically that you are a priority for the US partners, so that you've got the right support. And in particular, if most of your investors will be from the US. So I think that's another point to also address with the bankers, and make sure that you get the right attention from them.
Yeah, that's interesting, and I guess goes back a bit to the point that Gil was making earlier, that whatever you do, make sure you have a good set of advisors that that can help you draft in English, or make sure that if you're trying an IPO in the US, that you have a banker that knows what he's doing and understands which investors will be available then. Maybe to close the panel, Jason, if I may ask a last question to you. I think your profile is particularly interested in that you've been on the company side, You've been on the scale up side. Now you're also on the investor side. Maybe before we finish off the panel, any final kind of risk management techniques that you have applied or seen applied in your career, whether it be as an investor or when you were at the company?
Yeah, and actually, and kind of related to that, to follow up on Dulce's segment, you made the comment that not necessarily unusual to pull an IPO. At Patheon, we also delayed for a significant period of time our IPO after we had filed our S1. We had and this kind of relates to the risk management, we had a significant data integrity issue coming out of Europe, and at this time we were private equity sponsored, but we had engaged at a strong team of investment bankers advising us, including UBS. And as we went through the process of looking at the data integrity issue, which was a significant compliance footfall, and was very material, and took a long time and significant resources to correct and realign. And that's one piece of it. There was a compliance issue. But interestingly, our PE backers wanted to push forward with the IPO because they were looking for an exit. And we, as a CDMO, from the management perspective, and then kind of with having strong, experienced investment bankers, kind of to bolster our perspective, we're largely focused on, not just the compliance issue, right, which is what it is, and you deal with it, but really more the reputational impact. In a number of different ways, right? I mean, one is getting it corrected, but also kind of thinking through kind of dealing with that from a public company perspective versus still being a private company, and the disclosures, et cetera, that we would have had to have made. Where we came down was, better from a value driving perspective and a reputational protection perspective to be able to control that more effectively, remaining a private company. And we did that. We delayed it about, forget whether it was 9 months or 12 months. Then we did a successful, $800 million, IPO, which was, one of the largest IPOs in the segment, in 2016. So it just kind of to give a little kind of flavor to kind of how compliance risk, kind of also kind of bleeds over into managing reputation, because at the end of the day, compliance is not to minimize it, because it's so important with facing, patients, et cetera. But at the end, it also is for a CDMO and in the therapeutics company as well, is the basis of the reputation. But anyway, getting back to your core question, then, kind of risk management techniques, Marie, you went down the list before. I mean, the key, number one is really understanding context, identifying the risks, and coming up with a plan. And for us, again, not focused, core on therapeutic development. So, but as a support kind of, both my whole career, basically, tools, services supporting the development and commercialization of therapeutics. Understanding the therapeutic risk is still a core driver to us, because, kind of even as a CDMO, we kind of looked at our clients as a portfolio of investments, because we make decisions on how we want to allocate our manufacturing capacity. So really important understanding that clinical technology risk, regardless, I think, in many ways of where you are in the life sciences sector, and then having a plan to deal with it, with the contingencies. Second area is deal structure. There, kind of thinking through how you kind of structure the valuation to deal with risk and uncertainty, and you kind of get to the whole kind of portfolio of tools, whether it be earnouts or other contingent value rights, and also with respect to investment risk and company risk, thinking through kind of how to potentially tranche investments based on whether they're performance milestones or technology accomplishment milestones. and also kind of managing downside, whether it's through liquidation preference or other types of contractual mechanisms. You know, one of the ways that strategics can manage risk, you know, in some ways more effectively than investors is through synergies, whether they're operational, revenue, or customer, because they're often making the investments or the acquisitions for you know, strategic reasons. That has an effect both on the value that they pay, but also, and one of the reasons that they're able to kind of, you know, potentially stretch a bit kind of in valuation is A, the rationale for the investment, but B, the way that they're able to capture synergies in ways that PE firms or other investors just can't. And if kind of moving from there to kind of specifically Kiniciti and how we look to manage risk, in many ways, you know, if you look at kind of the segment that we're in, the cell and gene therapy space, emerging market segment, vast majority of the companies very early in their life cycle, you know, we, you know, and kind of, you know, as kind of a platform, an investment platform within a white shoe, you know, private equity firm. We kind of look at ourselves as a hybrid approach, kind of giving a private equity firm exposure to really a venture capital space, and to try to do that in a way that we kind of view as kind of a hybrid, in that, you know, our team, on the one hand, you look on the outside and you think of operators, kind of that, you know, operators for a PE firm in a way, but at the same time, we're managing a portfolio of investments. So we take a very active role in the companies that we invest in, try to leverage the experience that we've had in strategics, and in many ways are looking to build a portfolio that's able to capture synergies across the portfolio.
No, that's very interesting, Jason. And Hector, maybe to finish off the panel, is that idea of synergies, is that something that you also look at when you're making investments?
Well, we are investing in mostly in early stage companies, so they're still to build the model at that stage. I think the excellence in how they manage their resources is something we definitely look at, but we also look at the perspective of where they can get to. So hard, I think, to make that comparison to where Takeda Digital Ventures invests, but definitely it is. It's the entrepreneurial side of things. How well do they manage their asset that they have, and how capable are they already at the state where they are, and how clearly do they see their future? It's part of the overall diligence work that we do before investing. Definitely, it's a crucial element of it. But I think it's just reflective, one reflective element of the overall diligence work that goes into any investment. And early stage, I think, is still a little bit different, particularly if we look at digital health technology only, because very often these solutions come in areas where there's no comparator, there's nothing, there's no benchmarking possibility, and so I would say each case is different from a synergy perspective. Difficult to make just a general statement to the individual situations.
Of course. Great. Well, thanks everybody again for the panel. Really appreciate you participating to the discussion. Back Josh, back to you.
Fantastic, thank you, Wim. And yes, let me reiterate that my thanks to Dulce, Marie, Hector, Gil, Jason, and of course Wim for guiding us through that discussion. I thought it was a really fascinating sort of in-depth look at this topic, and lots of great advice and insights shared, I think, as well as some war stories, which I hope was very valuable for everyone listening in. Please do continue the conversation, reach out indeed to any of our speakers from this morning through the platform. We do have a little break now until 12 o'clock, where we'll be returning with one of our masterclasses focusing on M&A and a refresher for the current markets. So we have about an hour's break until 12. Maybe a good time to visit the booths. Sidley and all of our other partners have booths where you can interact with them and see a lot of content and downloadable things from those booths. The company showcases for all the companies who are presenting their investment opportunity and their technology, and indeed booking in more meetings. The platform's open all week, and indeed for our in-person partnering day next Monday on the 15th in London. So for now, thanks again to the panel, and see you at 12 in our M&A Masterclass.